Okay, let's talk about the housing crisis. It's a huge deal, right? It feels super personal for millions of us, and honestly, everyone seems to be pointing fingers about who's to blame. So today, we're going to dig in and try to figure out what's really going on. I mean, have you ever felt this? That dream of owning a home just seems to be slipping further and further away. It's incredibly frustrating. You do the math, you look at your paycheck, you look at the price tags on houses, and it just doesn't work. So, what is going on here? Why does it feel so impossible? Well, a really interesting new survey just came out that gets right to the heart of this, and what it found is pretty wild. There's this huge gap between what most of us think is causing the problem and what a lot of economists are pointing to as the real root cause. And that disconnect, that's what we're going to unpack right now.
All right, first up, the public's diagnosis. Let's get right into what everyday Americans are saying is to blame for this whole mess.
So, the numbers we're looking at here come from a big survey by Bright MLS. They asked over 3,200 people across the country a really simple question. Hey, why is housing so incredibly unaffordable right now? And wow, the answers were not subtle. The two biggest reasons by a long shot, a huge 55.5% of people said, we just don't make enough money. And right on its heels, 50.1% pointed to mortgage rates being way too high. I mean, look at that chart. Those two things just dominate everything else. It's all about our personal bank accounts. And you know what? That perspective makes total sense. As Lisa Sturtenvant, the chief economist at Bright MLS, points out, think about it. For a whole decade before the pandemic, home prices and our incomes were kind of moving in sync. But then, starting in 2020, bam, home prices just exploded. And then mortgage rates shot up right after. So if you're the one trying to buy a house, the things you feel the most are the hits to your wallet.
So, case closed, right? It's an income problem and a mortgage rate problem. End of story. Or is it? Is that really the whole picture?
And that brings us to the other side of this whole debate, the missing piece. This is where economists chime in, and they're focused on something that, you'll notice, didn't really top the charts in that survey, the actual supply of houses.
So you can really see the two different stories here. On one side, you have the consumer focus, which is all about personal finances, right? How much do I make? And what's that monthly mortgage payment going to cost me? But on the other side, you have the economists looking at the big picture, the market dynamics, and saying, hey, we have a massive housing shortage.
And just how big a shortage are we talking about? Well, the exact number is debated, but recent research suggests the U.S. is short at least 1.1 million homes. Just let that sink in. 1.1 million. That's a huge gap between how many houses exist and how many families need one. Okay, but to be fair, it's not like people are completely ignoring the supply issue. The survey definitely shows that some consumers do see it. It's just that they see it and talk about it in a very particular way.
And here's how that breaks down. You've got 43% of people saying, yeah, the problem is there aren't enough homes at the lower end of the market, the affordable ones. And then about a quarter of people say the issue is there aren't enough homes where people actually want to live. So you see, the supply problem is there in their minds, but it's always tied back to price and location.
Now, this gets even more interesting when you start digging into the data, because there's a pretty clear generational divide. It turns out your age really changes what you see as the biggest roadblock to buying a house. Okay, check this out. For people under 40, a top concern is just finding a house in a place they actually want to live. But for folks over 60, that's way less of a concern. On the flip side, older Americans are really worried about how much new homes cost, which isn't as big of a deal for younger buyers. And get this, more than half of the 60-plus group pointed to things like insurance and property taxes as huge problems, while less than 40% of the younger generation did. So with all these competing ideas and different concerns, that brings us to the big question. What do we do about it? Let's get into our final section, the hunt for solutions and the different paths to making homes affordable again.
Broadly speaking, the proposed solutions seem to fall into a few main categories. First, you've got direct help for buyers, things like down payment assistance programs. Then there's the idea of construction reform, which is all about changing the rules to make it cheaper and easier to, actually build more houses. And finally, you have some big federal ideas being thrown around, like letting people tap into retirement funds or having the government step into the mortgage market. But hold on a second. There's one group we haven't talked about yet, the one you always hear about in the news. What about the big corporate investors swooping in and buying up all the houses? You'd think that would be at the top of everyone's list, right?
Well, this is pretty surprising. According to this survey, only about a third of people, 32.3% to be exact, think that big investors buying up houses is a major reason things are so unaffordable.
And this brings us full circle, right back to the main point we started with. Even though we hear a lot about cracking down on corporate buyers, for the average person who took this survey, that worry just doesn't compare to the very real, very personal pressure of not enough income and sky-high mortgage rates.
So that leaves us with the big final question, doesn't it? Is the housing crisis fundamentally a problem of income, or is it a problem of inventory? Most people are feeling the pinch in their paychecks, but economists are pointing to a fundamental lack of homes. And what this survey really shows us is that the answer might just depend entirely on who you ask.